When my people still had worlds, we called ourselves the Sileth Choir, not because we sang, we remembered together. Each Silath carried only a thin thread of self. The true body of our civilization lived between us, in shared memory, in scent, in pulse, in the quiet passing of thought from one life to another across generations. A city was not only stone. A fleet was not only ships. A people was the chain of memory held across many living minds. To destroy us, you did not need to kill every body. You only had to break the chain. The Rhaak understood that long ago. For 9,000 standard years, perhaps longer, our war with them had grown beyond territory, trade, or tribute. It had become belief, structure, necessity. To younger species, it would have seemed impossible to understand. To us, it had simply become the shape of history. The Rhaak did not hate the way warm-blood species hate, they concluded. They were creatures of dense mineral flesh, each body formed from many hardened segments around a pressure core. They remembered in layered stone. Their dead were not buried. They were ground down, worn into armor, and folded into the castes that made decisions. When a Rhaak fleet went to war, its ancestors went with it, speaking through the hull in pulses of stress and vibration. To them, an unfinished enemy was not just a future threat. It was a crack left in reality itself. If war remained unresolved, then peace built on top of it would always break. So when they finally broke us, surrender was never going to save us. I was aboard the archive vessel Keth morning when the final cull began above Talaris, our oldest inhabited shell world. I was no soldier, no admiral. I had served as a civic memory keeper. My work had been tending chorus vaults, preserving inheritance records, and shaping grief into forms that could be carried forward. In the end, I stood in a chamber of failing light, while elders decided which memory vessels would be loaded and which would be dissolved. Children were sealed into suspension cradles. Gene stocks were condensed. Historical archives were cut down into emergency seeds so small and crude they made me feel ill. Outside, Talaris burned in rings. The sky was tangled with debris and fire. Our surviving defense ships spun crippled in place because half their guidance choirs had been killed by focused gravity strikes. Through the hull we could feel the last fleet command dying, not over comms, through the plating itself. A broken pulse of names, coordinates, and stripped-down farewells. I remember one elder placing her hand on a sealed child vessel and pouring her final memories into it, because there was no room left in the archive stacks. I remember the order to cut away all non-essential biological mass. I remember not asking whether I was essential. We fled with 17 vessels, 2 war hulks with failing cores, 3 archive ships including mine, 6 civilian seed arcs carrying sleeping young and frozen germlines. The rest were scavenged carriers packed with wounded, diplomats, scholars, and those too politically inconvenient to save until politics no longer mattered. The Rhaak came after us, not with a grand armada. They did not need one. They sent extermination pursuit groups instead, fast and patient, each licensed to finish what had begun. They followed our wake through dangerous transit paths, stripped away our decoys, and killed our drives one by one. Every time we changed course, they were there. Every time we dropped into real space to cool our reactors or bury our dead, Hunter's signatures appeared at the edge of our sensors. We fled outward, away from the dense inner roots and the old powers, toward the thin dark halo where the stars grew sparse and the maps grew uncertain, the outer rim. Among the ancient civilizations, the Far Rim was treated as a place of exile, resource extraction, and youthful mistakes. The species that rose there were not considered important. They died alone, or they were absorbed when found. There were scattered reports of a bipedal oxygen breather civilization called human, late rising, energetic, diplomatic, fast-growing by the standards of young species, not relevant to a war like ours. When our lead navigator suggested turning toward human-charted space, no one claimed it was wise. We only argued that it might buy us a few extra weeks before the Rhaak caught us. Then the humans found us first. We were 3 jumps beyond the last working relay on our stolen map when our sensors caught incoming drives from an impossible vector. Fast. Far too fast for the mass readings we were getting. Panic swept the Keth morning, archive shutters slammed shut, memory caskets sealed. One of our surviving war hulks tried to turn broadside, even though it barely had enough thrust left to rotate. The first human ships did not look like conquerors. They were dark rescue cruisers, angular and practical, with external dock spines and bright civilian identification bands. Small by the standards of the fleet that had destroyed us. They stopped just outside our firing range and sent a transmission, first in clean mathematics, then in machine-built Silath sent code so awkward it was almost insulting. You are in human-controlled outer rim transit, powered-down weapons. Medical and life support aid available, pursuit signatures detected, sanctuary possible. I thought then that kindness had taken physical form, only so it could die beside us. The transfer into the human rescue perimeter remains vivid to me because I did not expect to survive it. Human tug drones latched onto our damaged seed arcs and pulled them into a defensive sphere. Their ships moved without ceremony, and because they showed no ritual or display, I mistook them for crude. Then I saw one human cruiser place itself directly between the Keth morning and an incoming Rhaak pursuit lance, without pausing for permission from any superior authority. No species trained by the inner galaxy did such a thing casually. The first battle came in open dark at the edge of human space. A Rhaak hunter broke stealth and launched a spread of pressure weapons meant to cripple our engines and scatter us. 3 human ships answered at once, no speeches, no challenge rights. Panels unfolded along their hulls, and the incoming weapons vanished in a wash of cold light I did not recognize. Another human vessel accelerated across our bow so hard that my own instincts said it should have torn itself apart. It did not. It slammed into the Rhaak hunter's path, forced it out of position long enough, and the convoy translated. We lost one carrier. Its hull burst open and living memory spilled into vacuum, but the children survived. The humans brought us first not to a planet, but to a border station called Laconia Gate, hanging in the shadow of an ice giant deep in human outer edge territory. The name matters because from then on place mattered. Laconia Gate was plainly human, modular rings, repair arms, quiet traffic, no ancestral monuments, no towering intimidation. Compared to the fortresses of the old powers, it looked almost modest. Inside it they saved us. Within hours, medical bays had been adapted for multiple atmospheres and chemistries. Their biologists handled Sileth tissue with almost embarrassing gentleness. They had no proper words for the kinds of memory trauma we carried, so they invented terms as they worked. They cooled damaged resonance nodes. They stabilized children whose growth patterns had been shattered by battle shock. They asked permission before touching archive vessels. They treated our dead as if the dead still belonged to someone. That unsettled me more than neglect would have. The officer assigned to us was a human named Commander Elias Venn. He was old by human standards, though to me he still seemed young beside the spans I had known. His face was lined, his voice flat, his posture almost careless. He informed us that sanctuary would be granted, that our ships would be repaired where possible, and that once triage was complete, we would be moved deeper into human space. I asked him if he understood what would follow. He said, yes. Nothing more. At Laconia Gate, I began to notice things that troubled me. Human engineers repaired one of our archive cooling systems, using methods I had only seen in restricted military studies. A junior physician examining my resonance sheath casually asked whether late-war Rhaak pressure weapons still favored triaxial stress patterns, as if she had studied enemy doctrine for practical use. Station maps marked whole sectors as restricted logistics zones. Once, while looking through a maintenance port into what I thought was empty space, I saw a controlled gravitational distortion slide across the stars, too large to be a ship and too precise to be natural. When I asked about it, a human technician sealed the port and said, "Transit test farther out. Nothing you need to worry about." At the time, I thought he meant nothing I could understand. From Laconia Gate, we were moved by escorted convoy to a sanctuary habitat called Haven Spindle, built around a dim red star 3 jumps inward from the border. It was no borrowed neutral site and no captured relic. It was entirely human, agricultural bands, water reservoirs, medical districts adapted for our atmosphere, schools, fabrication bays, defensive bulkheads hidden behind civilian paneling, thick enough to make me uneasy. Humans already lived there, families, workers, elderly, children. They made room for ours. I watched human children press curious hand to transparent barriers to stare at Sileth hatchlings floating in nutrient gel. I watched a human woman patiently teach one of our orphan juveniles to shape simple trade language sounds. I watched freight crews unload protein media for us beside toys, air filters, and replacement machine parts, all on the same shift schedule, as if preserving a shattered species and restocking a town were simply neighboring duties. We thanked them, we mourned among them. And with every cycle, my dread deepened. Because the Rhaak would come. They found us sooner than I hoped and later than I feared. Their first demand reached Haven Spindle by relay from a human diplomatic cutter at the border. Our surviving civic authorities were allowed to hear the full transmission, and I was present as a witness because I kept continuity records. The Rhaak emissary did not appear as a visible individual. Their message came as a pressure pattern sent through matter itself, translated by human systems into sound and visual stress lines. Attached to it were mineral records of ancestral dead, proof that old conquest lineages endorsed the demand. Completion remains unfinished. Sileth survival mass persists in your jurisdiction. Transfer all biological remnants, memory vessels, and derivative archives. This is not negotiation. Interference constitutes inheritance of unresolved war. The human reply came jointly from Civil Authority and Outer Defense Command. It was so plain it would have shamed every ancient court in the galaxy. The refugees in human protection are non-combatants and survivors. They will not be surrendered for extermination. Disputes regarding war crimes, prisoners, or historical liabilities may be addressed through neutral process. Genocide will not be facilitated. Do not enter human sanctuary space. The Rhaak sent back certainty, not anger. You are young. You confuse mercy with stability. Residual Sileth memory is future war in dormant form. If you preserve them, you inherit them, transfer the remnants. The humans refused again. The first attacks were limited. Hunter probes crossed the border. Relief convoys between Laconia Gate and Haven Spindle were intercepted. Predatory code was seeded into navigation systems in attempts to expose refugee movement. One mixed human-Sileth cargo transport was destroyed inside recognized human territory. The Rhaak were proving a theorem. Humanity did not collapse. They increased escorts, hardened communications, moved us again and again between marked sanctuary sites. From Haven Spindle to a buried shelter complex beneath the ice of a moon called Ilex. Then back again when the threat shifted. Then deeper still to a protected habitat cluster in a system whose official chart stopped halfway through the route. Every move was orderly. Every site was human-built or human-controlled. Every corridor had layers of protection I had not first noticed. And the humans grew quieter. There were no panic broadcasts, no desperate speeches, no begging for aid from the old powers. Their diplomats kept warning the Rhaak to withdraw. Their commanders kept offering monitored tribunals. Their rescue workers still arrived with those grotesque human smiles, handing out water packs and thermal wraps, and asking after children by name. I had seen doomed civilizations before. They became loud, humans became still. Then the Rhaak crossed the last line. The place was Mercy 7, a human medical habitat in the Bell Reach system, clearly marked under every humanitarian code then recognized. It housed wounded humans from the border fighting, wounded Sileth civilians from Haven Spindle, and 2 nursery wards of our dormant young waiting for metabolic stabilization. I was there in the archive annex, recording the names of the newly dead, so their memory seeds would not be lost to clerical failure. The attack did not feel like battle. It felt like a sentence. 3 Rhaak penetration craft slipped through a courier lane and embedded themselves along the habitat's spin axis. Their warheads were not designed for spectacle. They were precision imploders, calibrated to crush internal structure and vent atmosphere in selected sectors, while leaving enough of the shell intact for boarding. They meant to kill the caregivers and seize our young. The first implosion took the lower pediatric ward. I remember the sound, not an explosion. A hard, punched-out silence followed by metal groaning like a wounded beast. The ring lurched. Lights died. The corridor floor flexed beneath me, then split. I saw a human nurse throw herself over a nursery cradle and vanish into venting frost. I saw one of our juvenile memory keepers trying to sing orientation signals through blood, because hatchlings wake in panic when pressure fails. I remember crawling with an archive casket strapped to my thorax, while emergency shutters slammed down one section at a time and distant compartments lost atmosphere. By the time human defense ships killed the attackers, Mercy 7 was open in 3 places and burning from within. More than 12,000 died there, humans and Silath together. Afterward, aboard a human evacuation ship refitted for casualties, I shook so violently my resonance sheath would not settle. I was certain we had brought destruction upon the only people foolish enough to shelter us. I said as much to Commander Venn when he came through the ward with a burned sleeve and dried blood on one hand. He listened, then he said very softly, "No, they chose this." 3 hours later, human diplomats withdrew from every open channel with the Rhaak. In the days that followed, the outer rim changed. At Haven Spindle, entire residential decks were evacuated with eerie calm. At Laconia Gate, traffic records went dark. Border beacons powered down one by one, merchant lanes emptied. Civilian chatter faded into silence. We refugees were moved again, this time to a hardened sanctuary complex deeper than any before, orbiting a brown dwarf in an unmapped system far inside the human outer rim. The humans called it Kettle Deep. We were not permitted to record its coordinates. Nothing there looked grand. That was the pattern with humanity: functional docking cradles, buried reactors, rotating habitation drums. Quiet machine parts in the dark. But from Kettle Deep, our sensors began to show us what the official maps had hidden. Movement in supposedly empty systems. Power signatures under dead moons. Mass wakes where no registered traffic should exist. Short bursts of encrypted coordination across impossible distances. Later, I learned that the Rhaak read the silence as fear. Some of the inner powers did too. The young Outer-Rim species had overreached, been bloodied, and was now retreating to preserve what it could. I wanted to believe that. It would have made the universe familiar again. Instead, sitting in an observation blister at Kettle Deep, I watched the stars and felt something vast turning in the dark. The Rhaak punitive campaign entered human space through 3 border vectors. It was not a raid. It was a completion armada. Line breakers, pressure fleets, reduction tenders, archive incinerators, seizure hulls for civilian capture. They came to crush the shelters, seize the Sileth remnants, and leave a lesson in ruins. From Kettle Deep, we received battle telemetry filtered for refugees, clear enough to understand, limited enough to protect operations. The first clashes came near the border systems around Laconia Gate and Bell Reach, both well inside human territory. The Rhaak advanced expecting thin defenses and shallow depth. Instead, the maps betrayed them. Comet belts woke into weapon grids. Dead stations unfolded launch spines. Habitats that had seemed civilian shed outer skins and revealed armored cores packed with missiles. Swarms rose from ice fields and asteroid shadows. Volumes of empty space resolved into mine webs, drone clouds, and hidden drive masses. Then the fleets arrived. Not from one grand central anchorage, because there was no such target. Human warships emerged from cold storage around rogue planets, from shielded docks buried in moon crusts, from black industrial caverns hidden in systems the inner galaxy had never cared enough to name. Some were small and brutally fast. Some were vast mobile foundries wrapped in escorts. None wasted mass on ceremony. They looked built to absorb damage, be repaired quickly, and return. The Rhaak fought with ancient confidence, and for a short time confidence mattered. They broke through the first line at Bell Reach. They destroyed defense platforms around an outlying fuel world. They cracked a convoy node near Laconia Gate and turned 3 human ships into incandescent debris. Then the true depth of human space revealed itself. Every time the Rhaak pushed into a system, another prepared line activated behind the first. Transit times they had calculated from known human drives proved false. Human reinforcements arrived hours or days earlier than any model predicted. Logistics hubs the Rhaak believed cut off continued feeding the war through hidden corridors in the outer dark. Their doctrine relied on collapsing centralized command. Human command did not give them anything central enough to break. Nodes died, and the rest flowed around the damage. At Kettle Deep, refugees stood around tactical projections in silence. We watched border sectors, we had once dismissed, with pity become killing grounds for an empire that had mistaken concealment for emptiness. Then humanity activated Eden. I never heard the order, and I doubt most humans did either. Eden was not a speech. It was a change in state. Across the outer rim, dormant industry came alive. The first sign was a surge of heat from systems, so remote they did not even appear on our refugee maps. Then the reports began reaching the secured channels visible from Kettle Deep's command gallery, where by then Commander Venn had allowed a small Sileth liaison team to observe. Shipyard chains lit up around brown dwarfs and rogue worlds. Mining swarms changed course and became fabrication swarms. Civilian freighters took on naval modules and entered military logistics. Research stations switched from theory to weapons output. Quiet habitats opened armored bay doors and launched escorts in waves. Fuel depots unfolded into fleet anchors. The dark between systems filled with motion. Eden was not one secret shipyard. It was the whole outer rim human war industry, spread so wide and hidden so well that even standing inside it, I had mistaken fragments for coincidence. The frontier was not a frontier at all. It was a web of habitats, factories, reserve populations, hidden routes, command relays, and fallback worlds built patiently over generations in the dark. Humanity had accepted the contempt of the inner galaxy, because contempt is camouflage. Once Eden turned fully toward war, the punitive campaign stopped being an invasion. It became a trap. The rock armadas at the rim were cut into pockets, isolated, worn down, and denied retreat. Not without cost. Human ships died, habitats burned. Border worlds took scars they will keep for centuries. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The rock had come expecting prey. Instead, they had awakened a civilization secretly prepared for war against older and larger powers. When the last major invasion cluster broke near Bell Reach, the humans did not celebrate. They advanced. The offensive drove inward from the outer edge toward the old core routes, and this time I went with it. My role changed. I had once kept memory for the dead. Now, unwillingly, I guided the living. Aboard the human command ship, Resolute Margin, far from the sanctuary habitats of Kettle Deep and Haven Spindle, I sat with other Sileth survivors in a secure intelligence chamber and helped decode rock pursuit records, ancestral route habits, and extermination facility logic. We gave the humans the locations of cull depots, transit vaults, and command crypts where completion orders were stored. We identified civilian zones they must not strike, because our long war had taught us how easily every target becomes justifiable. The galaxy watched and reeled. Human fleets crossed regions that had treated the outer rim as a footnote. Replacement squadrons appeared behind breakthroughs faster than the old powers believed possible. Human strikes ignored ceremonial strongholds unless those strongholds mattered. They cut logistics, mobility, command vaults, pressure foundries, and the black archives where extermination licenses were kept. Their methods were not theatrical. They were cruel only in the way efficiency is cruel. A rock fleet node would stand proud under ancestral authority, and then its drives would die, its coordination would collapse, and a human assault wave would pass through it on the way to something more important. Subject species, long bent under rock certainty, began refusing support requests. Neutral powers who had dismissed humanity as peripheral suddenly found outer rim task forces, crossing their observatories like weather. Even the species that feared humans most understood the truth. This was not conquest, it was dismantling. The rock fought with the terrible discipline that had nearly erased us. But their doctrine had been shaped by ancient enemies who displayed their strength openly, centralized authority, and obeyed forms other old powers could read. Humanity did not. Human command was distributed. Human industry replaced losses. Human fleets adapted between battles instead of between generations. Every week of the war made them more dangerous. And still, they did not become what the Rhaak had been. When human forces captured a Rhaak-culling world where juvenile lineages were trained in extermination law, they disarmed it and occupied it. They did not sterilize it. When they seized pressure vaults filled with ancestral corpse records authorizing total eradication, they preserved copies for tribunal evidence rather than destroying everything in revenge. When frightened client populations tried to surrender by offering up local Rhaak civilians, human commanders refused. That mattered to me more than victory did. My people had once believed ourselves too old to be judged. In our long war we had done cruel things, not genocide, never that, but cruelties enough. I had feared that only another kind of righteous extermination could stop the Rhaak, and that if humans proved strong enough, they would choose it. They did not. Their answer was harsher than annihilation. They destroyed the institutions that made extermination possible. They shattered the fleets that enforced it. They broke the command lineages that had sanctified it. They occupied the transit vaults, dismantled strategic weapons, and bound what remained of Rhaak authority under a new order in which no completion war could ever be law again. Ancient certainty was not answered with extinction. It was answered with exposure, disarmament, and public defeat so complete that the galaxy would never again mistake the outer rim for empty innocence. I was physically present on the final day of the Armistice Judgment, in a captured Rhaak command basin near the inner roots. The chamber had once amplified ancestral pressure song. Human engineers had converted it for multi-species proceedings. Commander Venn stood there not as emperor, not as avenger, but as a tired officer speaking for a civilization that had been forced into the open. He said, "No people may be hunted through our space. No people may be delivered from our protection to extermination. No war, however old, grants that right." Simple words, human words. And because human fleets hung over a dozen broken Rhaak strongholds, because Eden still thundered behind them from the cold outer dark, because the whole galaxy had finally seen what lay beyond the margins of its maps, those words became law. We Silath were not restored. There would be no empire again. No return to ancestral splendor. Too much was ash. Too much should remain ash. Our survivors were settled under human sanctuary, and under our own emerging councils in habitats, we helped design, but did not rule as masters. At Haven Spindle, rebuilt and expanded, our children now learn in chambers where human and Sileth symbols hang side by side. At Kettle Deep, memory vaults hum again, not with the full chorus of what we were, but with enough to continue. Enough to become something else. I still mourn Talaris. I still dream of Mercy 7 opening to vacuum. Grief does not end when justice arrives. It only changes shape. Sometimes I stand in an observation gallery on Haven Spindle and look past the red star into the black of the rim. Traffic moves there now in patterns I can finally read. Freight lines, patrol arcs, habitat tenders, school ships, war reserves sleeping in dark orbit beneath laws everyone suddenly respects. The outer edge no longer seems empty to me. It never was. We fled to the margin believing it was a wasteland, a place where history thinned and the old powers no longer cared enough to kill efficiently. We were wrong. The edge was not empty, it was hidden, cold, patient, and immense. A fortress grown in silence by a species that had learned, alone, that survival sometimes depends on being underestimated until the day saying no becomes necessary. I once thought humans were kind and doomed. Now I know they were kind and waiting. And across the galaxy, from the oldest inner vaults to the newest settlements under unfamiliar suns, there is now a law carried in whispers, tribunal records, fleet doctrine, and parental warning alike. Do not hunt refugees into human space.